Welcome back to our cozy forest adventures. Join Oliver, Millie, Henry S.I., Mr. Badger as they embark on a brand new journey through the woods, discovering surprises, friendship, and tiny magical moments along the way. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming forest tales. Sweet dreams and happy listening. Stories from the Woods, a series of silly events. The morning began with a soft drizzle, the kind that pattered gently on leaves and sent tiny rivers running down the thatched roofs of the meadow village. From inside her snug burrow, Millie the squirrel listened to the sound while she sipped from a steaming mug of chamomile tea. She liked the rain, especially on mornings when she didn't need to hurry anywhere. But this morning was different. This morning she had promised to help Mr. Badger. Mr. Badger's home stood at the far end of the clearing, half hidden under an old oak tree whose roots knuckled over the ground like twisted ropes. His house was warm and welcoming inside, but the roof had begun to sag. Every rainstorm left him with dripping buckets and damp corners. He had asked for help quietly, not wanting to trouble anyone. But Millie had noticed, and she had gathered her friends Oliver and Henry the Hedgehog to lend their paws. She set her mug down, pulled on her hooded cloak, and stepped outside. The drizzle had softened into a fine mist, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. Across the meadow, Oliver Mouse was already hurrying toward her, carrying a bundle of small tools tied up in cloth. Henry followed more slowly, his satchel bouncing at his side. "You're both here early," Millie said cheerfully. Oliver puffed his chest. "We're roof builders today. Builders should never be late." Henry grinned. "I only came because I heard there might be soup afterward." Millie laughed, and the three of them set off together, their paws squishing in the damp grass. Birds called faintly through the mist, and the brook nearby gurgled louder than usual from the rain. When they reached Mr. Badger's house, the old fellow was waiting by the door. His striped face broke into a smile as he saw them. Well, what's all this? A team of experts. Experts in training. Oliver corrected with a twitch of his whiskers. Mr. Badger chuckled. "Come inside first. You shouldn't start work on an empty stomach." The inside of his home was dim but cozy, lit by the fire crackling in the hearth. A pot of vegetable stew hung over the flames, filling the room with a rich, comforting smell. A round table stood nearby, set with thick slices of brown bread, cheese, and a small jar of plum jam. Henry's eyes brightened. "I knew there'd be soup." They sat together, the rain tapping on the roof above, and ate until their bellies were full and warm. Then Mr. Badger led them back outside. The roof did look worn. Some of the old thatch had slipped loose, leaving dark gaps where rain could seep in. Millie tilted her head, studying it. "We'll need fresh reeds," she said. "The brookside has plenty. I can fetch them," Oliver offered. "My paws are quick." Henry raised his satchel. "And I've got string and nails just in case." Soon the work began. Oliver dashed to the brook and returned with armfuls of long, golden reeds, still wet from the rain. Millie showed how to weave them into bundles, tying them tightly so they wouldn't fall apart. Henry clambered carefully up the ladder, his little spines making the climb slow but steady, and began fixing the new reeds into place. "Not too loose," Millie called up. "They need to overlap like feathers on a bird's wing." Henry muttered good-naturedly as he worked. "Easy for you to say from down there." Oliver scampered up behind him with more reeds, and soon the roof began to look brighter, patched with fresh golden layers against the older gray ones. The hours passed quietly, broken only by the sound of their voices, the occasional splash of water dripping from the eaves, and the steady rustle of reeds being tucked into place. Sometimes the clouds parted and a beam of sunlight spilled across the meadow, turning the wet grass into a sea of sparkling drops. Other times, a breeze swept through, carrying the smell of wood smoke and wet leaves. By midday, their paws were sore and their fur damp, but the roof looked whole again. The worst leaks were gone, the new reeds neatly overlapping like a warm blanket. Mr. Badger stood below, his paws folded, his eyes soft. "You've given me back my home," he said quietly. "No more buckets by the bed. No more dripping onto my stew." Millie's heart warmed at his words. "It was nothing," she said. "Friends help friends." Oliver hopped down the ladder, shaking out his whiskers proudly. "Besides, it was fun, almost like building a nest." Henry groaned, rubbing his back. "If nests require this much climbing, I'll pass." They all laughed, and Mr. Badger ushered them back inside, where the fire was still glowing. The pot of stew had thickened and bubbled into a rich broth, and he ladled it generously into bowls. This time, he added slices of carrot and sprigs of thyme on top, making the smell even stronger. They ate with the windows open, letting in the cool, damp air. Outside, the mist had lifted, leaving the meadow washed clean and bright. Birds hopped along the hedges, shaking water from their feathers. "Thank you," Mr. Badger said again, his deep voice steady. "It's not just the roof. It's knowing I'm not alone here." Millie reached across the table, her paw brushing his. "You never were." The fire popped, the bowls steamed, and for a long while they ate in peace, their hearts lighter than they had been that morning. But as they finished, Oliver's eyes flicked toward the window. "The brook looked lively today," he said. "I wonder if the rains have stirred the fish." Millie smiled knowingly. "Are you suggesting another adventure already?" "Not suggesting," Oliver said with a grin. "Promising." The morning after their roof work, the sun rose bright and golden, pushing thin strands of mist out of the meadow. The air felt crisp and new, washed clean by the night's rain. Millie woke to the sound of blackbirds singing from the hedges and the cheerful chatter of sparrows near her window. She stretched, brushed her tail smooth, and felt a little spark of excitement. Oliver's words from yesterday still rang in her ears. The brook looked lively today. She packed a small basket with a cloth, a loaf of rye bread wrapped in paper, and a wedge of cheese. Henry had promised to bring pickles, and she knew Oliver would come running with something sweet, probably honey or jam. They never went out without food, because even the best adventures were better when shared around a snack. By the time she stepped outside, the meadow was alive with the hum of insects and the glimmer of dew catching the light. The brook whispered somewhere ahead, unseen through the trees, and she could already smell its cool freshness drifting on the breeze. Oliver appeared first, scampering along the path with a jar of golden honey clutched in his paws. "Good morning," he called, his whiskers twitching with excitement. "I told you the brook would be perfect today. I can feel it in my tail." Henry waddled up a few moments later, his satchel rattling with jars. "Pickles as promised, and a few carrot sticks. Don't ask me why. I just felt like bringing them." "Carrots and honey don't mix," Oliver teased. Henry gave him a look. "Then don't eat them together." They laughed, their paws crunching on fallen leaves as they walked together toward the brook. The path wound through tall grass and under arching trees. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in golden patches, and the air was filled with the scents of damp earth and wild mint growing along the edges of the trail. When they reached the brook, they all stopped to take it in. The water rushed clear and quick, bubbling over smooth stones, shining like glass where the sun struck it. Long reeds bent toward the current, swaying gently, and dragonflies hovered with wings that sparkled blue and green. "It looks alive," Oliver whispered, his eyes wide. "Like it's waiting for us." They settled on a flat rock by the edge, laying out their baskets. Millie unwrapped the bread and cheese. Henry set down his pickles, and Oliver placed the honey jar carefully in the middle like a prize. The scent of it drifted into the warm air, mixing with the brook's cool freshness. But food could wait. First, Oliver dipped a paw in the water. "It's cold," he squeaked, shaking droplets from his fur. "Perfect for fish." Millie fetched a little line she had made from twine, with a bent pin for a hook, and tied a crumb of bread to it. "Let's see if you're right." She lowered it into the water, watching the current tug at the string. Henry leaned over, his spines almost brushing the surface. For a while, they were quiet, listening to the brook's song and the rustle of leaves overhead. The sunlight made shifting patterns on the stones beneath the water, and minnows flickered like silver arrows. Then tug. Millie's line quivered. "I've got one," she gasped. She pulled, and out came a plump little fish, wriggling and sparkling in the sun. She slipped it gently into a small wooden pail. Oliver clapped his paws, his whiskers quivering with pride. One by one, they tried their luck. Henry wasn't as quick, but his patience paid off, and soon their pail held 3 shining fish. They decided that was enough. Wouldn't be kind to take more than they needed. By then, their stomachs were rumbling. They spread their meal across the flat rock. Millie sliced the bread into thick pieces. Oliver drizzled honey until it gleamed golden, and Henry offered pickles that added a sharp, tangy smell to the air. The cheese crumbled soft and creamy, and together it made a feast fit for kings. The brook babbled at their side. Dragonflies danced above them, and the sun warmed their fur. Between bites, they spoke of simple things. Which herbs were growing fastest this season, whether the blackberries near the hedge were ripe yet, and which neighbor might need help next. After they had eaten, Oliver lay back with his paws behind his head, watching clouds drift lazily overhead. "Do you ever think," he mused, "that every day in the woods is a gift? That even a brook like this is a friend?" Millie smiled softly, brushing crumbs from her lap. "I think about it every morning." Henry sighed contentedly, chewing one last carrot stick. "I think about it only when my belly is full." They all laughed, their voices carrying over the water like birdsong. As the afternoon stretched on, they cleaned their dishes and let the brook carry away the last crumbs. The fish they carried carefully back to the village, knowing Mr. Badger would love them stewed with herbs. By the time they returned, the sun was sinking low, painting the meadow with long shadows. Mr. Badger greeted them warmly, and together they cooked a simple supper, the fish simmering with sprigs of rosemary and slices of onion. The smell filled the whole burrow until even Oliver was silent, waiting for the first taste. When the bowls were set before them, steaming and fragrant, Millie thought of the brook's clear water and the way the dragonflies had glittered in the sun. She thought of the laughter on the rock and the warmth of friends close by, and she realized the real catch of the day wasn't in the pail. It was here, around the table, in the joy of being together. The sun had begun to set, turning the sky into a canvas of rose and gold. The meadow glowed as though lit from within, every blade of grass tipped with light, every spiderweb a string of jewels. Millie, Oliver, Henry, and Mr. Badger sat outside after supper, watching the last rays sink beyond the trees. Oliver broke the silence first, his whiskers twitching. "It feels too nice to just go to bed, don't you think? Nights like this deserve something special." Henry stretched, his paws resting on his round belly. "Special, yes. But what?" Millie tilted her head, thinking. She remembered something her grandmother had once told her about lighting lanterns at dusk to guide the stars. The memory warmed her like a secret. "We could make lanterns," she said softly. "Paper ones. Set them on the brook and watch them float away." Oliver sat bolt upright, eyes shining. "Lanterns. Brilliant. We can send them drifting with little wishes tied inside." Henry grinned. "As long as we don't set the woods on fire, I'm in." Mr. Badger chuckled deeply. "Lanterns it is, but you'll need some supplies." The next hour was filled with cheerful preparation. They gathered old scraps of thin parchment, soft reeds from the brook, and bits of twine. Millie showed them how to fold the paper into little globes, fastening the reeds as frames. Oliver carefully dabbed them with brushes dipped in berry juice and flower dye, painting swirls of color, violet, blue, and green. Henry added steady hands, tying each knot securely, while Mr. Badger carved tiny holders for the candles from softwood. By the time they finished, dusk had deepened. The forest glowed faintly, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and the first chorus of crickets. Fireflies began to blink here and there, tiny lanterns of their own. They carried their handmade creations to the brook. The water, dark and silver now, moved with a quiet grace under the moonlight. The trees leaned close, their branches swaying in the soft night breeze. Millie lit the first candle, shielding it with her paw as the flame flickered alive. She placed the lantern gently on the water, and the brook caught it, carrying it smoothly downstream. The glow reflected on the ripples like a trail of stars. One by one, they added their lanterns. Oliver's was painted in spirals of green, Henry's in neat blue stripes, Millie's in pale pink like the inside of a shell, and Mr. Badger's glowed golden with simple circles. They floated side by side, bobbing gently, their lights shimmering against the night. They sat on the bank together, silent for a long moment, watching the lanterns drift. Crickets chirped, an owl called softly in the distance, and the brook whispered its endless song. The lanterns grew smaller and smaller, until they seemed to join the stars above. Oliver finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Do you think the brook carries them to the sea?" "Maybe," Millie said. "Maybe to the sea, maybe to the stars. Maybe they just light the path for anyone who walks along the banks tonight." Henry yawned, though his eyes stayed on the glowing trail. "I like that thought. Little lights for wanderers." Mr. Badger nodded slowly. "It reminds us that even the smallest flame has meaning." They lingered there until the last lantern was only a pinprick in the dark. Then, with hearts strangely light, they made their way back to the meadow. Fireflies danced around them, and the air was cool against their fur. Back at Mr. Badger's home, they settled again by the hearth. The lantern-making tools lay scattered on the table, smudged with berry dye, smelling faintly of reeds and twine. Oliver licked a paw, accidentally tasting some juice. "Blueberries," he announced proudly. Henry laughed. "At least your paint was edible." Millie tucked herself into her seat with a soft sigh. "I think this might be my favorite evening of the year so far." The others murmured their agreement. And outside, though the lanterns had floated far away, their memory seemed to linger, like small stars that had once come close enough to touch. The next morning, the brook still shimmered faintly with memory, as if the lantern's glow had brushed its waters for good. Sunlight poured into the meadow, making the dew sparkle like tiny diamonds. The air carried the scent of damp earth and sweet clover. Oliver stretched on the porch of Mr. Badger's house, paws high above his head. "I can still see the lanterns when I close my eyes," he said, blinking at the bright sky. Millie was already plucking wildflowers, arranging them into a small bundle. "I like how the water carried them," she replied, "like it wanted to be part of our game." Henry came out next, munching on a leftover biscuit. His ears twitched as he spotted the brook winding its way through the meadow. "Speaking of water," he said, his mouth half full, "do you two know how good I am at skipping stones?" Oliver raised an eyebrow. "Good? Or just loud about it?" Henry puffed out his chest. "Both." Mr. Badger, sweeping the porch with his slow and steady rhythm, chuckled. "Ah, stone skipping. Now, there's an art. Patience, practice, and the right sort of flat stone." That was all it took to set the plan in motion. Within minutes, the four of them were at the brook's edge, hunting for the perfect stones. The sun made the surface glisten, and the gentle sound of the current mixed with their cheerful chatter. Millie held up a round pebble, smooth as an egg. "This one," Oliver shook his head. "Too heavy. You need one that's like a pancake." Henry grinned, pulling out a flat, oval stone and holding it up proudly. "Like this." He gave it a quick toss over the water. The stone skipped once, twice, then plunked into the brook with a splash. "Ah!" Henry cheered. "Two skips." Oliver rolled his eyes and crouched low, selecting a slimmer stone. He wound up with dramatic flair and flicked his paw. The stone danced across the water, 1, 2, 3 for times before sinking. He turned with a bow. "4 skips. That's how it's done." Millie, careful and quiet, tried next. Her first stone dropped right in with a plop. She frowned, then tried again, listening to Oliver's quick tips. On her third attempt, the stone hopped twice before sinking. Millie clapped her paws. "I did it." Mr. Badger waited patiently, selecting his stone with care. He bent low, gave a small flick, and the stone went sailing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times before it vanished down the current. They all gasped. 7 skips, Oliver exclaimed. That's not fair. You've had 100 years of practice. Mr. Badger chuckled softly. Patience, not years, is what makes a stone dance. The game went on, laughter echoing over the brook. At one point, Henry tried to hurl a massive rock just to see the splash. It drenched everyone, and Millie squeaked in surprise while Oliver chased them in circles, both of them dripping. Eventually, they lay in the grass to dry, watching clouds drift lazily across the sky. The brook gurgled beside them, carrying away their stones and laughter. Millie sighed contentedly. Every day feels like it belongs to us. Until tomorrow, Henry added, when I beat your 7 skips. Dream on, Oliver muttered, but his smile gave him away. The following afternoon, Millie discovered something strange. While gathering flowers near the tall grass, she noticed the stems swaying rhythmically, though the air was still. She tilted her ears and caught a faint hum, like strings being plucked. She hurried back. Come quick. The meadow is singing. Oliver, Henry, and Mr. Badger followed her, curiosity lighting their faces. Sure enough, the wind had begun to stir gently, making the grass bend and the wild reeds whistle. Crickets added their chirping rhythm, and somewhere above, a skylark trilled. It's like music, Oliver whispered. Henry grabbed a hollow reed, held it to his lips, and blew. A soft, airy note joined the sound. His eyes widened. We could make our own meadow orchestra. Millie clapped her paws in delight. Yes, instruments from the things around us. They scattered, each collecting materials. Oliver found 2 smooth sticks and clacked them together, creating a cheerful beat. Millie strung a spider's silk strand across a forked twig and plucked it like a tiny harp. Henry experimented with different reeds, blowing until he found one that hummed like a flute. Mr. Badger, steady as always, carved a small drum from an old hollow log, stretching a scrap of bark across the top. When he tapped it with his paw, a deep, soothing sound rolled across the meadow. Together, they began to play. Oliver's sticks kept time, Henry's reed flute sang, Millie's harp twinkled like dew, and Mr. Badger's drum held them steady. Nature itself joined in, the grass whistling, the crickets chirping, the wind sighing through the trees. They laughed between notes, sometimes going off-beat, sometimes stumbling into a harmony so beautiful it made them pause and wonder. Millie's eyes shone. We sound like the meadow itself is playing with us. As twilight settled, their little orchestra slowed. Fireflies appeared, pulsing in rhythm with the fading notes. The last sound came from Mr. Badger's drum, a single boom that seemed to echo into the evening sky. They sat together afterward, hearts quiet and full. Henry whispered, "Do you think the meadow will remember our song?" Oliver nudged him. "Of course it will. And next time the wind blows, it'll hum it back to us." The next morning dawned bright and cool, with a playful breeze teasing the leaves. Oliver bounded out of the burrow first, carrying a roll of parchment he had found tucked away in Mr. Badger's shelves. "Look at this," he cried, spreading across the table. "It's a map, but not of towns or roads. It's a map of here. The meadow, the brook, even the big oak tree." Millie leaned closer, eyes wide. "There are dotted lines. Are those hidden paths?" Mr. Badger stroked his chin. "Old trails, some forgotten. My grandfather showed me that map when I was a pup. Most animals don't use them anymore, but they wind through secret places." Henry's tail swished with excitement. "Secret places? Then what are we waiting for?" So off they went, following the dotted lines across the meadow. The first path led them through a tunnel of brambles, where berries grew fat and sweet. Millie picked a handful and tucked them in her basket, laughing when Oliver got juice all over his whiskers. The second path curved behind the waterfall at the brook. They stepped carefully on the slick rocks, gasping as they found a hidden hollow. Inside, moss glowed faintly in the dim light, like tiny stars. They sat for a while, just listening to the water roar around them. The third path was the most surprising. It climbed gently up a hill none of them had ever bothered to explore. At the top, the meadow stretched below them like a patchwork quilt, the brook glimmering like silver thread. They could see their whole little world at once. Henry whistled. No one told me we lived in a painting. Millie's voice was soft, odd. It makes everything feel bigger, but also closer. Oliver grinned. Imagine how many more paths are waiting. They stayed until the sun dipped, the map folded safely in Millie's basket. Each of them felt as though they had stepped into a secret only the four of them now shared. The day was windy, with strong gusts sweeping across the meadow, bending grasses and rustling every leaf. Oliver leaned against the doorway of Mr. Badger's burrow, his ears flicking in the breeze. "Feels like the wind is asking us to play," he said. Henry, always restless, was already trying to balance a large leaf over his head, letting the gusts catch it like a sail. It whipped out of his paws and fluttered away, making him tumble backward into the grass. "See?" he laughed, spitting out a clover stem. "The wind likes me." Millie watched quietly, her paws clasped together. "What if we built something the wind could carry? Like a bird we made ourselves?" Mr. Badger's whiskers twitched. "Ah, a kite." His voice was slow and deep, as though he had pulled the word out of memory. "My father made one for me once. Sturdy wood frame, cloth stretched tight. When it lifted into the sky, it felt as though my heart was flying with it." That was enough to send the others scrambling. Oliver dragged thin willow branches into the clearing. Millie fetched a bundle of old cloth scraps from her sewing basket, and Henry darted about collecting string from wherever he could find it. The work took most of the morning. Oliver tied the wooden frame with careful knots. Millie stitched pieces of cloth into a patchwork that shone with reds, yellows, and blues, and Henry managed to tangle the string around himself more times than anyone could count. Mr. Badger oversaw it all, his big paws surprisingly gentle as he tightened each corner. Finally, they held it up, a kite shaped like a great swallow, its patchwork wings ready to meet the sky. "Let's see if it can fly," Henry shouted, grabbing the string spool. He ran across the meadow, but the kite flopped and dragged in the grass. Oliver groaned. "You're running the wrong way." Into the wind, not away from it. They tried again, this time with Oliver sprinting forward, the others cheering him on. The wind tugged at the swallow's wings, lifting them higher and higher until suddenly, whoosh, the kite soared upward. Millie gasped. "It's flying." The swallow-shaped kite rose above the meadow, dipping and swaying in the current. Oliver braced his paws, grinning with pride as it tugged at the string. Henry begged for a turn, then Millie, each one feeling the thrill of holding the sky in their paws. Even Mr. Badger took a turn, his deep chuckle rolling out as the wind pulled against him. For hours, they watched their kite dance among the clouds. It twisted dove and soared, a splash of color against the wide blue sky. Birds circled curiously, as if trying to decide whether this strange swallow was a friend. As the sun began to sink, painting the sky orange and pink, they reeled the kite back in. The fabric fluttered softly, and when Millie folded it neatly, she smiled. It felt like the wind was telling us a story. Or laughing at Henry tripping over the string, Oliver teased. Henry huffed, but couldn't help laughing too. "Next time, I'm making a bigger one." Mr. Badger looked at them all with a soft gaze. "There will always be wind, and now you know how to catch it." The following morning was golden and still, the kind of day that made the air hum with warmth. Millie suggested a picnic, her voice shy but bright. "I've been keeping jars of jam, and there's cheese and fresh bread waiting. We could eat on Clover Hill. It's high enough to see the whole meadow." Oliver's ears perked. "Food and a view? That's my kind of idea." Henry was already bouncing in circles. "I'll carry the basket." "No, wait. I'll carry the blanket." "If I carry the basket, I'll eat everything before we get there. They packed carefully, filling a wicker basket with Millie's homemade berry jam, Mr. Badger's hearty cheese, a loaf of warm bread, a few sausages wrapped in paper, and a bundle of herbs that Oliver insisted made everything taste better. Millie added a pot of honey for sweetness, and Henry sneaked in a handful of nuts. The walk to Clover Hill was slow, the basket heavy and the day warm, but the path was lined with wildflowers and the sound of bees buzzing lazily. When they reached the top, the meadow spread out below them like a quilt of green and gold. They laid out the blanket and set the food in the center. Millie sliced the bread, Oliver spread the jam, Henry devoured sausage after sausage, and Mr. Badger poured cool spring water into cups he had carried. The meal was simple but perfect. Crumbs clung to their whiskers, jam stained their paws, and the scent of herbs drifted in the warm air. Afterward, they lay on their backs, watching clouds drift lazily overhead. "That one looks like a ship," Henry said, pointing. Millie squinted. "No, it looks like a teapot." Oliver laughed. "If it's a teapot, then that other one is definitely a slice of cheese." Mr. Badger chuckled. "You see what your hearts are full of. Ships, tea, and cheese. It tells me much about each of you." They dozed in the sun until a breeze picked up, carrying the smell of clover and honey. When they packed up to leave, the basket was empty, but their hearts were full. As they walked home, Millie whispered, "It wasn't just food. It was all of us together." Oliver grinned. "Well, next time we'll need 2 baskets." That evening, after their picnic, the meadow grew cool and hushed. Fireflies began to appear, blinking softly among the tall grass. Oliver, still restless with energy, looked at the fading light and said, "You know what would make tonight even better? Lanterns." Henry tilted his head. "Lanterns? Like the ones we floated on the brook?" Oliver shook his head. "Not on the water. In the trees. Imagine the whole meadow glowing like the sky has come down to live with us." Millie's eyes lit up. "We still have jars, and I've kept scraps of cloth we could use." Mr. Badger rose, his deep voice warm. "Then let us gather what we need." They worked quickly, filling jars with candles, covering them with colorful cloth so the light would glow softly. Henry carried them in a bundle. Oliver tied long strings, and Millie hummed as she painted tiny patterns on the jars, stars, flowers, and spirals. When night fell fully, they hung the lanterns from branches, high and low. One by one, the meadow transformed. The trees glowed with soft reds, yellows, and blues. The brook reflected the colors, rippling them into shifting patterns. Henry spun in circles. It's like we're inside the stars. Oliver lay on his back, gazing upward. "Better than the stars. These ones are ours." Millie stood quietly, paws clasped under her chin. "It feels like a festival, but just for us." Mr. Badger settled on a stump, watching the lanterns sway. Sometimes, the smallest lights make the biggest warmth. They stayed late into the night, talking softly, their faces lit by the glow. Crickets played their steady rhythm. The brook murmured nearby, and the lanterns swayed gently in the breeze. When they finally returned to the burrow, they carried the glow inside them, a memory that would shine on long after the candles burned out. The next day began with soft sunlight and the smell of damp earth, as if the night had rained somewhere far away. Oliver stood on the edge of the brook, paws on his hips. The water sparkled, tumbling gently over smooth stones, but his eyes narrowed at the crooked old plank that served as their crossing. "This thing wobbles like Henry on too much honey," Oliver muttered. Henry hopped beside him, testing the plank with one foot. It creaked, dipped, and splashed water onto his toes. "It's not that bad," he said, just as the plank slipped and dunked him ankle deep. He yelped, hopping backward. "Okay, maybe it is that bad." Millie approached, holding a basket of herbs she had gathered that morning. She frowned when she saw the plank. "It makes me nervous. What if it breaks when someone's carrying something heavy?" Mr. Badger rumbled from the other side of the brook, where he had been gathering stones for his garden wall. "Then we build something new. something strong. And so, their next little adventure began. Oliver ran back to the burrow for rope and spare wood. Henry darted around, gathering sturdy branches and insisting he was project manager. Millie offered her sewing twine for lashing smaller pieces, and Mr. Badger, calm and steady, chose the strongest stones to lay as supports on each bank. The sound of hammering, splashing, and occasional bickering filled the day. Oliver measured and remeasured, wanting the bridge to be straight. Henry kept testing each beam too early and falling in with a splash. Millie hummed while tying knots, her careful paws keeping everything neat. Mr. Badger guided them all, his patience smoothing over every mistake. By afternoon, a small wooden bridge stretched proudly across the brook. It wasn't grand, but it was steady, with rails tied from willow branches and a little arch in the middle. Millie clapped her paws. It looks like something out of a storybook. Henry puffed out his chest. And I only fell in 4 times. They tested it together, paws stepping carefully at first, then more boldly. The brook gurgled happily beneath them, as if pleased with its new crown. When the sun dipped low, they sat on the bridge itself, dangling their paws into the cool water. Oliver sighed, satisfied. Now we can cross without fear. Mr. Badger nodded slowly. And every time we do, we'll remember the day we built it together. The brook whispered beneath them, carrying their laughter downstream. One evening, as twilight painted the meadow in soft purples and blues, Millie paused in her work. She had been stirring a pot of berry preserves, the sweet scent drifting through the burrow, when a sound slipped in through the open window. It was soft at first, almost shy, then fuller, a song unlike any she had heard before. A nightingale. Listen, she whispered, calling the others. Oliver and Henry patted over, ears twitching, while Mr. Badger set down his mug of tea. They all stood still as the melody rose and fell, rich and flowing, like liquid silver in the air. Henry sighed dreamily. It sounds like the stars are singing. Oliver, always restless, looked around. We should find it. Millie's paws tightened on her apron. Not to chase, just to see, quietly. So they slipped outside, the evening cool against their fur. The lanterns from the night before still hung in the trees, unlit but swaying in the breeze. They followed the song through the meadow, past the brook into a grove of tall trees. There, perched on a slender branch, the nightingale sang. Its small body quivered with each note, eyes half closed, as if pouring its whole heart into the world. They didn't speak. They simply listened. The song filled the grove, wrapping around them like a blanket. It carried something beyond words. Joy, longing, peace, hope, all together in one flowing tune. Millie felt her eyes prick with tears. It makes everything feel brighter, even the dark. Mr. Badger's voice was quiet. That is the gift of a song freely given. They sat under the tree until the bird's notes faded into the night. Fireflies began to blink, and the stars overhead echoed the music in their silent light. When they finally walked home, no one said much, but each carried the song in their hearts, like a secret gift. Back at the burrow, Millie whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll try to hum it while I work." Oliver smiled softly. "And maybe I won't argue with Henry, at least for a day." Henry snorted. "You'll forget by morning." But his grin was gentle too. Several days later, the wind returned, blustery, wild, chasing clouds across the sky. Henry leaned into it as he walked, ears flapping, laughing with delight. "Feels like it wants to push me right off my paws." Oliver braced against the gusts, fur ruffled. "We should make use of it, instead of letting it push you around." Mr. Badger lifted his head toward the hill where an old, broken windmill stood. Its blades were cracked, its roof sagging. That place once ground flour for half the meadow. Long ago, before it was forgotten. Millie's eyes widened. Could we fix it? It became their biggest project yet. They climbed the hill together, inspecting the windmill. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. Sunlight streamed through gaps, making stripes across the floor. Oliver ran his paw along the gear system, frowning. It's worn, but not hopeless. Henry picked up a fallen blade. Heavy, but I can carry it. He dropped it with a grunt. Well, maybe not alone. Millie brushed cobwebs from the walls, already picturing fresh paint. We could bring it back to life. Not just for flour, maybe for grinding herbs, too. Mr. Badger nodded. The wind still blows. All it needs is hands willing to help. Days stretched into a week. They carried wood up the hill, patched the roof, rebuilt the blades. Henry sang as he hammered. Oliver muttered as he measured. Millie decorated every repaired part with small carvings of flowers and leaves, and Mr. Badger turned the great gears with his steady strength. Finally, one morning, the blade stood tall again. The wind swept across the hill, catching the sails. Slowly, then faster, the blades turned. The creak of old wood became a steady rhythm, the heart of the windmill beating again. They cheered, paws raised to the sky. Henry spun in circles, mimicking the blades. Millie clapped, her smile wide. Oliver, though exhausted, looked proud beyond words. When they tried grinding the first handful of wheat, the millstones turned smoothly, and flour sifted out like pale snow. They carried it home, baked a loaf together, and shared it warm, steam rising into the cool evening air. As they ate, Millie said softly, "It feels like we gave something back to the meadow." Mr. Badger placed a paw on the table. "And the meadow will give back to you again and again." The wind outside howled and sang, no longer lonely. The morning sun shone gently across the meadow, casting long golden streaks over dew-dappled grass. Oliver the rabbit stretched in the doorway of the burrow, squinting at the light. The breeze was soft, carrying the scent of apples. Henry the frog sniffed the air and blinked. "Smells sweet," he croaked. "Like jam before it's jam." Millie smiled, her whiskers twitching. "It must be the orchard. The apples are ripening." Mr. Badger set down the basket he was weaving and looked toward the distant hill. "It will be a good year. I can smell it, too." So it was decided. They would spend the day at the orchard. Each of them carried a basket, though Henry's was much smaller since he insisted he didn't plan on working too hard. The orchard was a magical place. Trees lined the hill in neat rows, branches heavy with fruit. The apples glowed in shades of green, yellow, and red, some dropping gently onto the grass below. Bees hummed lazily between blossoms, still clinging here and there, and the whole air smelled crisp and rich. Oliver hopped eagerly to the nearest tree and reached for an apple. "Biggest one gets the first bite," he declared. Henry puffed. "We'll see about that." He tried jumping, but barely brushed a leaf with his fingertips. Millie laughed softly and plucked one from a lower branch, placing it gently into her basket. Mr. Badger, slow and steady, reached up to gather 2 apples at once. "It isn't about who finds the biggest," he said calmly. "It's about what we do with them afterward." They spread through the orchard, working together. Oliver climbed halfway up one tree, carefully shaking branches until apples tumbled into a blanket Henry held open. Millie collected fallen ones, inspecting each to make sure they weren't bruised. Mr. Badger used his strength to carry the heaviest loads back to the baskets. By midday, their baskets were full and the sun was high. They sat under the shade of an old apple tree, biting into the fruit. Juice dribbled down their chins, and the crunch echoed in the still air. "This is better than bread and cheese," Henry declared with his mouth full. Oliver wiped his paws. "Don't say that too loudly. The cheese might get jealous." Millie giggled, but Mr. Badger only leaned back, eyes half closed. "This orchard has stood for generations, and every year it gives. That's what makes it a gift." They grew quiet, watching the sunlight filter through leaves. The orchard hummed with life, steady and eternal. And though their baskets were heavy, their hearts felt even fuller. When they returned home, Millie was already brimming with ideas. "We could make pies, and cider, and apple butter. Oh, there's so much we can do." Henry groaned dramatically. "That sounds like work." Oliver flicked his ear at him. "Work that ends in food, which is the best kind of work." So their little burrow became a workshop of flavors. Millie rolled dough with practiced paws, her apron dusted with flour. Oliver sliced apples into neat wedges, sneaking bites every few cuts. Henry tried to help but kept dropping slices into his mouth instead of the bowl. Mr. Badger oversaw the cider press, slow and methodical as always, turning the handle until golden liquid trickled out, filling a jug with sweet scent. The whole room filled with warmth. The oven glowing, the air thick with spice and sugar, laughter bubbling between them as they worked. Outside, the wind whispered through the willows, carrying the smell of baking out into the meadow. By evening, the table was covered, steaming pies, jars of apple butter cooling, a loaf of bread brushed with cider glaze, and mugs of warm spiced drink. They sat down together, the glow of lanterns soft around them, and dug in. Millie sighed happily after her first bite. This is the taste of autumn. Henry had jam on his chin and crumbs on his belly. This is the taste of heaven. Oliver leaned back, paws behind his head. This is the taste of too much apple. I can't eat another bite. Until tomorrow, Mr. Badger rumbled with a small smile. When the meal was done, they packed jars and loaves to share with neighbors in the forest. The night was cool as they walked, their baskets lighter, but their spirits glowing. Owls hooted softly overhead, and the stars seemed closer than usual. It wasn't just a feast of food. It was a feast of friendship, of giving and receiving, of knowing that the orchard's gift was not only for them, but for all who lived nearby. A few days later, as word spread of their cooking, neighbors arrived at the meadow. Hedgehogs, squirrels, birds, and even a shy fox or two gathered, curious about the scent of pies and cider. Millie, nervous but pleased, whispered, "Perhaps we could share it all together? A festival." And so it became one. Blankets were spread across the grass, lanterns were strung from trees, and the food was laid out for all. There was singing, small voices of mice blending with the deep croaks of frogs and the chirping of sparrows. Squirrels performed acrobatics in the branches, earning cheers, while the hedgehogs offered roasted chestnuts to go with the apple dishes. Oliver challenged Henry to see who could bob for apples the fastest, both ending up soaked to the fur and laughing so hard they fell over. Millie organized a game for the little ones, who rolled apples down a hill to see whose would reach the bottom first. Mr. Badger told stories by the fire, his voice steady as the crackling flames. The meadow glowed with joy. Lanterns swayed in the breeze. Music rose into the night, and the air smelled of spice, apples, and laughter. When the festival quieted and friends drifted back to their homes, the four sat together on the blanket, tired but happy. Millie leaned against Mr. Badger's shoulder. Oliver and Henry sprawled in the grass. The orchard shimmered faintly in the distance, as though proud of its children. "It started with a single apple," Millie whispered, "and ended with everyone full," Oliver added. Henry yawned, rubbing his eyes, "and with me ready to sleep for a week." Mr. Badger's voice was low and calm. "That is the way of good work and good days. They fill you up, then rest comes sweetly." The wind stirred gently, carrying the faint sound of leaves rustling in the orchard. Above them, the stars shone steady, watching over another season in the woods, another story complete. And so the festival of apples ended, not with noise, but with quiet hearts glowing together. The end. Thank you for joining Oliver, Millie, Henry S.I., Mr. Badger on their adventure. If you enjoyed this story, check out our channel for more magical forest tales and cozy adventures waiting just for you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back soon for the next story.